I'm sure most of us can appreciate that trees have different value to different people and different meanings to different people. But regardless, there is value to trees. In other courses this semester, you will learn more about how to assess the value, the landscape value of trees on the landscape. And that value is much different than, say, if this tree was cut down for firewood or even for lumber. Often that value on the landscape, in many cases, could be considered priceless to some, because the appeal, the aesthetics, and the appearance of that tree, even a single tree on a landscape, can really help define what the landscape looks like. For instance, in this example, we have a cenotaph, and around the cenotaph are these beautiful pears. And the pears, Pyrus species, they have white flowers, and it just really highlights this area. And there's huge value to that. The landscape would not look the same without those trees there. But at the same time, that tree may not be in the right location. And the number one thing, and you'll hear this over and over in different courses throughout the program, right tree for the right site is rule number one. Not all trees have value with where they are located. If the tree is not in the right location, especially in a case like this, eventually this may even become a liability as opposed to a tree having value. So putting the right tree in the right site is step one. And then the second part comes to the overall kind of design or the look we are trying to get by planting trees in an urban landscape. So trees are used in different ways as different functions, and we will be in our careers maintaining these trees in different locations. So some of the areas we should be considering are street trees, how trees are used for landscape trees, sometimes in gardening and horticulture for more background pieces, specimens, and special features. Let's have a look at some of these now. So street trees are set up to basically have kind of standard specs that we need to have. Okay, so it's important for a street tree when they are being grown to have a 2 meter or approximately a 6 foot high straight clear trunk. So you can see here that the trunk from here to here is approximately 6 foot straight and tall without branches. So that is the spec that people in the industry, the municipal arborists, require for trees to be growing along roadsides so that we have that straight trunk and that clearance zone for pedestrians and also for vehicles. And as those trees get taller, obviously pruning and maintenance is required in order to maintain that straight dominant trunk. But street trees are one that require a lot of maintenance after they've been planted in order to grow an ideal tree that is going to fit that space. And there are some pretty standard specs that are required before the tree can even be planted there. Landscape trees are kind of our trees growing out in the open. Quite often it could be associated with park settings, and often assumed that when you are planting this tree that there is space for that tree to grow. Okay, so if you hear a landscape tree, it's kind of what you visualize as a tree that is growing out in the open, such as this species has, and it has lots of space to grow and fill out, and it really adds to the whole landscape because it really takes up and it's kind of a focal piece in that landscape. Background. So trees can be used as, you may hear them called as borders or as backgrounds or boundaries, something like that. And here you have a number of different things. Over here, this is a species you'll learn later this semester called Fagus sylvatica or European beech. And over here we have some looks like eastern white cedar hedge. And in here, this looks like it's probably, again, we need to be closer to this photo to make sure we have it for sure, but it looks like we have an Anglo-Japanese yew, Taxus medea. So you've got a number of different hedges here, and in all of them themselves, just as I'm kind of stumbling over identifying what it is, goes to show they blend in, right? We don't really notice them very much as a tree itself, but as a function, as a hedge, as a backdrop. So we would notice if it's not there, but we don't really notice what exactly is this tree here. Our eyes aren't drawn to say, what is this? Okay, at least the untrained eye is not drawn to say, what is this? It's just a background piece that helps to frame a landscape. Okay, so that is another function that a tree may provide. There's another example here. This is down in Niagara Falls, and you can see that this hedge along here it's going to be a lot of maintenance, so you will likely be maintaining something like that someday. You may enjoy working with hedges, you may despise that. That's usually the two sides I hear from people working in industry. Personally, I always enjoyed working with hedges, but that's a matter of your opinion. And yeah, it just helps to provide a backdrop to this landscape here. And one of my favorites are the specimen trees. And you could argue it's like a landscape tree, but what I think is kind of cool about the specimen tree is, like these people in this photo, everybody stands back and admires it, says, wow, look at that tree. Right? A specimen tree is essentially that quintessential example. If you wanted to show someone in this example, I'm not sure if you've worked out identification yet, this is a tree from our maple study, and this is a Acer saccharum or sugar maple. Okay, the bark is just starting to exfoliate along the edges, and that's a giveaway for us for sugar maple. Okay, so in this case, this would be the best example of a sugar maple. If somebody had never seen a sugar maple before and you wanted to show them this is it, you would take them to this tree and say, this is a sugar maple. So typically a specimen tree is a prime example of that species, has good structure, strong genetics, is aesthetically pleasing, it looks good, and it's what you would want everyone to picture in their mind of as a sugar maple. Okay, great examples. Here's an oldie from the Davy Tree Archives. International Society of Arboriculture used this in a publication a few years ago, and such a great example of a beautiful old tree. To be honest, from here, my eyes can't tell you what it is. I think my gut tells me it's a very old white elm. Unfortunately, we don't have elms like that anymore because of Dutch elm disease. So that's why I'm having trouble determining that. To me, I've seen black walnut look something like this, but I'm pretty sure given the age of the photo, it's probably an old elm. One heck of a climbing strategy and ladder they have going on there. It's incredible. But that photo, just what the people climbing, the early arborists, it kind of strikes you. But for me, standing back, it's that, wow, what an example, what a wonderful example of this specimen. Beautiful tree. So that is a wonderful example of a classic specimen that we just don't see anymore. And in a forest, it may look completely different. It may look like something like this, where this student is walking past an old growth white oak with a beautiful straight trunk, huge diameter. Again, another prime example. If I wanted someone to see a white oak, wow, here it is, right? And that's your specimen tree. And in some locations, such as the Riverside Cemetery in Lindsay, that I know the arboriculture students become quite affectionately familiar with, you have a number of specimen trees coming together. So here you have a landscape that it would look very different without the large mature trees that are here. And being such a range, you've got a number of trees, but a range of species. All of them in this area of the cemetery quite old and quite unique. So you've got this combination of landscape trees that really are a number of different specimen trees involved here too. So the terminology can kind of overlap itself. So these really aren't defining terms, but sometimes when you're trying to describe a tree or to understand how it is being used on the landscape, it's good to just understand some of this kind of broad terminology and how we are looking or valuing this tree.